The first gunshot echoed across the vast New Mexico territory as Nora Fletcher clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, her bare feet bleeding from the sharp rocks and cacti she had traversed for miles. It was 1878, and the unforgiving western frontier showed no mercy to a widowed mother fleeing for her life. The relentless summer sun beat down upon Nora's sunburnt shoulders as she stumbled forward, her throat parched and her vision blurring. Her once fine calico dress was torn and dirty, a testament to the 3 days she had spent walking after bandits had stolen her horse and belongings, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and her precious baby Victoria. "Hush now, Vicky," she whispered as the infant whimpered against her chest. "We'll find help soon." But even as she spoke the words, Nora knew she was running out of time. Her milk had begun to dry up from dehydration, and her 6-month-old daughter needed nourishment. The nearest town was still a day's walk away, and Nora wasn't certain she could make it through another night in the wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze in her tracks. Bandits, Apaches. Either could mean death for her and her child. With nowhere to hide on the barren plain, Nora stood her ground, summoning the last of her strength to face whatever threat approached. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, the silhouette of a man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. As he drew closer, Nora could make out his features beneath the wide-brimmed Stetson, a strong jawline covered in stubble, piercing blue eyes, and broad shoulders beneath a dusty leather vest. A cowboy. He pulled his horse to a stop a few yards from her, his expression shifting from wariness to concern as he took in her disheveled appearance and the baby in her arms. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "you look to be in a bad way." Nora lifted her chin, dignity being the only possession she had left. "We've had some misfortune, sir, but we'll manage." The cowboy's eyes softened as they fell on the infant. "That little one needs shelter, and you won't make it far on those feet." He extended his hand. "Name's Luke Keller. I've got a ranch about an hour's ride from here. Come on up behind me. I'll get you both to safety." Nora hesitated, years of frontier wisdom telling her to be wary of strangers. But as Victoria let out another hungry cry and her own legs threatened to give way beneath her, she knew she had no choice. "Nora Fletcher," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And this is my daughter, Victoria." Luke dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a spooked deer. "Mrs. Fletcher, I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you or your child under my protection." There was something in his eyes, honesty perhaps, or kindness, that made Nora believe him. She nodded once and allowed him to help her onto his horse before climbing up behind her. His arms reached around to take the reins, creating a protective circle around Nora and her baby. "Hold on tight," he instructed, and they set off across the landscape, unaware that this chance encounter would forever change the course of their lives. Luke's ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance and a 2-story wooden house that looked sturdy enough to withstand the occasional territorial storms. As they approached, a middle-aged Mexican woman emerged from the house, her eyes widening at the sight of Luke returning with a woman and child. "Maria," Luke called out, "heat some water and prepare the guest room. We have visitors in need of care." Maria nodded and hurried back inside as Luke helped Nora dismount, supporting her weight when her injured feet touched the ground. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gentler than Nora would have expected from a man of his stature. "I believe so," she replied, though the pain was evident in her expression. Without another word, Luke scooped her up in his arms, baby and all, and carried them into the house as if they weighed nothing. "This isn't necessary," Nora protested weakly. "Maybe not," Luke replied with a small smile, "but it's faster." Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable with simple but solid furniture and clean floors. Luke carried Nora to a rocking chair in the kitchen and carefully set her down. "Maria will help you get cleaned up," he explained. "She's been with me for years, best cook in the territory and handy with medicines too." As if on cue, Maria appeared with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. The poor Nina, she clucked, reaching for Victoria. Let me hold her while you rest, Senora. Reluctantly, Nora handed over her daughter, her maternal instincts screaming in protest despite her exhaustion. She's hungry, Nora explained. I haven't been able to feed her properly. We have goat's milk, Luke said, already heading for the door. I'll fetch some. While Luke was gone, Maria helped Nora wash her face and hands before tending to her feet. The older woman worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the cuts and applying a soothing salve that smelled of herbs and honey. You are lucky, Senor, Luke found you, Maria said as she wrapped Nora's feet in clean bandages. Many would not stop for strangers in these parts. Why did he? Nora asked, genuinely curious. Good Samaritans were rare on the frontier, Maria smiled knowingly. Senor Luke has a good heart. Too good sometimes. He sees someone in trouble, he helps. Simple as that. When Luke returned with the milk, Maria showed Nora how to feed Victoria using a clean cloth as a wick for the baby to suckle. The relief on the infant's face as she finally received nourishment brought tears to Nora's eyes. Thank you, she said, looking up at Luke, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. I don't know how I'll repay your kindness. No need for that, he replied, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. In the lawless territories, compassion was often seen as weakness, and weakness got you killed. After Victoria had been fed and was sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Luke finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air since he'd found Nora on the trail. If you don't mind me asking, Mrs. Fletcher, what brought you out to these parts alone? Nora sighed, the weight of her story pressing down on her shoulders. My husband, Thomas, was a shopkeeper in St. Louis. We came west 6 months ago, just before Victoria was born, following promises of opportunity in Santa Fe. Thomas had a cousin there who'd written about opening a general store together. She paused, the familiar ache of grief tightening her throat. We were 2 days out from Santa Fe when raiders attacked our wagon train. Thomas, he tried to protect us. He didn't survive. Nora blinked back tears. I managed to escape with Victoria and our horse. I've been making my way to Santa Fe ever since, but 3 days ago I stopped to rest and woke to find my horse and supplies stolen. Luke's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Those men still out there? I don't know, Nora admitted. I haven't seen anyone since it happened. Well, you're safe now, Luke assured her. You can stay here until you're recovered, then I'll escort you to Santa Fe myself. That's very generous, but no arguments, Luke said firmly. It's not safe for a woman and child alone. Besides, I need to make a supply run to town anyway. Nora wanted to protest further to assert her independence as she had done since Thomas's death, but exhaustion won out. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Luke, he corrected with a small smile. Mr. Keller was my father. That night, after being shown to a small but clean bedroom, Nora slept deeply for the first time in months, knowing that she and Victoria were, at least temporarily, safe. Over the next few days, Nora's feet began to heal under Maria's careful attention, and Victoria thrived with regular feedings and the security of a stable environment. Luke kept his distance, seemingly aware of the impropriety of having an unmarried woman in his home, but Nora often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. On the 4th morning, Nora woke before dawn and found herself restless. Careful not to disturb Victoria, who slept soundly in the cradle Luke had fashioned from an old apple crate, Nora made her way downstairs. To her surprise, Luke was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a ledger open before him. You're up early, he commented, closing the book as she entered. I'm not used to idleness, Nora admitted. In St. Louis, I helped run our shop. Since Thomas died, I've been moving constantly. Being still feels strange. Luke nodded in understanding and pushed a cup toward her. Coffee. Nora accepted gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. I've been thinking about your offer to take me to Santa Fe. While I appreciate it immensely, I'm not sure what awaits me there. Thomas's cousin may not welcome a widow and child as readily as he would have welcomed a business partner. What will you do? Luke asked, his blue eyes studying her face. Nora shrugged, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Fine work, I suppose. I'm good with numbers and inventories. Perhaps a shopkeeper might need assistance. Luke was quiet for a moment, seemingly weighing his words. There's another option, he said finally. You could stay here. Nora's head snapped up in surprise. Here. Just until you figure things out, Luke clarified quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. The house is big enough and Maria would welcome the company. I could use help with the books too, if you're as good with numbers as you say. The offer was tempting, far more tempting than Nora wanted to admit. In just a few days, Luke's ranch had begun to feel like a haven, and the thought of facing the uncertainty of Santa Fe alone with Victoria was daunting. I couldn't impose, she began, but Luke cut her off. It's not an imposition if you're earning your keep, he pointed out, and you'd be doing me a favor. Maria's been after me to hire someone to help around the place for years. Nora considered his words. Perhaps, just until my feet are fully healed and I can make proper arrangements. Luke's smile was warm enough to chase away the pre-dawn chill. Then it's settled. Welcome to the Double K Ranch, Mrs. Fletcher. Nora, she corrected softly. If I'm to stay, you might as well use my name. Something flickered in Luke's eyes, something that made Nora's heart beat a little faster. Nora it is. As the days turned into weeks, Nora found herself falling into a comfortable routine at the Double K. Each morning, she would tend to Victoria before joining Luke for breakfast, after which she would spend a few hours organizing his chaotic bookkeeping while he worked with the cattle. In the afternoons, she helped Maria with household chores, learning Spanish phrases from the older woman who had quickly become a friend. Luke, Nora discovered, was a man of few words but countless thoughtful actions. He never returned from town without a small gift for Victoria, a wooden rattle, a soft blanket, a cloth doll, and he seemed to anticipate Nora's needs before she voiced them. A shelf appeared in her room for her few belongings. A small desk was moved near the window where the light was best for her bookkeeping. Fresh wildflowers mysteriously appeared on the kitchen table every few days. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Nora found Luke on the porch whittling a small wooden horse as the sun set over the distant mountains. Victoria's asleep, she said, sitting beside him on the steps. She's growing so fast, soon she'll be crawling. Luke smiled, his hands never pausing in their skilled movements. She's a strong one, like her mother. The compliment warmed Nora more than it should have. May I ask you something personal? She ventured. Luke nodded, his focus still on his carving. Why are you alone out here, a man like you? I would have thought you'd have a family of your own by now. Luke's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. I was engaged once, back in '72. Her name was Rebecca. She died of fever before we could marry. I'm sorry, Nora said softly, understanding all too well the hollow ache of losing someone you loved. After that, I came west, bought this land, built this place. Luke shrugged. Never met anyone who made me want to try again, until he stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than he intended. Nora's heart skipped a beat. Until Luke set down his carving and finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Until I found a woman walking barefoot with a baby in her arms. The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken emotions. Nora's pulse quickened as Luke's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. Luke, Nora, Maria's voice shattered the moment as she burst onto the porch, her expression frantic. Riders coming, many men, and they don't look friendly. Luke was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he ordered, all softness gone from his voice. Both of you lock the doors. Through the window, Nora watched as 5 riders approached, dust billowing behind them. Their leader, a tall man with a shock of white blonde hair, pulled up in front of Luke, who stood his ground in the yard, hand resting casually near his gun. That's Wade Blackwood, Maria whispered fearfully. Bad man, very bad. Nora could hear the muffled conversation, catching only snippets of words. The blonde man seemed angry, gesturing emphatically while Luke stood motionless, his posture tense but controlled. After several tense minutes, the riders turned and galloped away, but not before the leader spat on the ground at Luke's feet. When Luke returned to the house, his expression was grim. "What did they want?" Nora asked, Victoria now awake and fussing in her arms. "Blackwood claims I've been rustling his cattle," Luke said, his voice tight with anger. "Says he's missing 20 head and my brand was seen in the area." "That's ridiculous," Nora exclaimed. "You've been here every day. I would have noticed if you'd brought in stolen cattle." Luke's smile was mirthless. "Blackwood doesn't care about the truth. He's been trying to force me off this land for years. My water rights are better than his, and he knows it." "What will you do?" Nora asked, unconsciously stepping closer to him. "For now, nothing. He's just making noise." Luke reached out to stroke Victoria's cheek, his touch gentling instantly. "But I think it might be best if you reconsidered going to Santa Fe. Things could get dangerous here." The thought of leaving the double K of leaving Luke sent a sharp pain through Nora's chest. "I'm not afraid," she said firmly. "You should be," Luke replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Blackwood is dangerous and he doesn't play by any rules. All the more reason you shouldn't face him alone," Nora argued. "We're staying, Luke. This is our home now, too." The words slipped out before she could stop them, but once spoken, Nora knew they were true. In just a month, the ranch had become more of a home than anywhere she'd lived since leaving St. Louis. Luke's expression softened, and for a moment, Nora thought he might pull her into his arms. Instead, he nodded once and said, "Then we'd best be prepared. I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow." True to his word, the next morning found Nora standing behind the barn, a revolver heavy in her hands as Luke positioned himself behind her, guiding her aim toward a row of bottles set on the fence. "Keep both eyes open," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." Nora was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back and the strength in the arms that bracketed hers. She fired, the recoil jerking her hands upward despite Luke's steadying presence. The bottle remained untouched. "Again," Luke said patiently. "This time breathe out as you squeeze." They practiced for an hour until Nora could hit the target more often than not and her arms ached from the weight of the gun. As they walked back to the house, Luke handed her the revolver. "Keep this with you," he said. "I pray you never need it, but if you do, don't hesitate." That night, Nora dreamed of Thomas for the first time in months. In the dream, he smiled at her sadly and whispered, "Be happy, Nora," before fading away like morning mist. She woke with tears on her cheeks but a curious lightness in her heart, as if a burden had been lifted. The next few weeks passed without incident, but Luke remained vigilant, never venturing far from the house and instructing Nora and Maria to keep doors locked and the shotgun handy. Despite the underlying tension, life at the Double K continued its peaceful rhythm, and Nora found herself watching Luke with increasing frequency, noting the gentleness with which he handled Victoria, now 8 months old and crawling everywhere, and the quiet strength he displayed in everything he did. One evening in late August, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it driving rain and spectacular lightning that illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Victoria, frightened by the thunder, refused to sleep, so Nora paced the floor with her, singing softly to soothe the child's fears. Luke found them in the kitchen, Victoria finally dozing against Nora's shoulder as she swayed gently back and forth. "She doesn't like the storm," Nora explained unnecessarily. Luke nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. "Neither did I as a boy. My mother used to tell me that thunder was just the angels moving furniture in heaven." The image made Nora smile. What a lovely thought. "She was a lovely woman," Luke said quietly. "You remind me of her sometimes. Same strength, same kindness." The compliment brought a flush to Nora's cheeks. "I should put Victoria down now that she's asleep." Luke nodded but made no move to leave the doorway. When Nora returned from settling Victoria in her cradle, she found him still there watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Is something wrong?" she asked, smoothing her skirts nervously. "No," Luke said, taking a step toward her. "Just the opposite, in fact. Something is very right, and I've been too much of a coward to say so." Nora's breath caught in her throat as Luke closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. "I never expected to find you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I'd made my peace with being alone. But then there you were, walking barefoot with your baby in your arms, and everything changed." "Luke," Nora whispered, unable to say more as emotions clogged her throat. "I know it's too soon," he continued. "I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never presume to replace him. But I needed you to know that I care for you, Nora, deeply, more than I thought possible." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating Luke's face, earnest, vulnerable, and filled with a tenderness that made Nora's heart ache. "You don't have to say anything," he added quickly. "I just couldn't keep it inside any longer." But Nora did have something to say. She reached up, her fingers lightly touching his cheek. "Thomas will always be a part of me," she said softly. "He gave me Victoria, but my heart didn't die with him, Luke, and these past weeks. You've reminded me what it feels like to be alive again." The hope that bloomed in Luke's eyes was almost painful to witness. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His hands came up to cradle her face as if she were made of the finest porcelain, and Nora felt herself melting into his embrace, her own arms wrapping around his waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Nora Fletcher, that as long as I live, you and Victoria will never walk alone again." The following morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Nora woke with a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. As she fed and dressed Victoria, she couldn't help but hum a cheerful tune, earning curious looks from her daughter. "We're happy, Vicky," she explained, kissing the baby's plump cheek. "Mama is happy." Downstairs, she found Luke and Maria in deep conversation that ceased abruptly when she entered the kitchen. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in Luke's presence despite the intimacy they had shared the night before. Luke's smile was warm enough to chase away any uncertainty. "Good morning," he replied, crossing the room to place a gentle kiss on her forehead and tickle Victoria under her chin. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted. Maria beamed at them both, her approval evident in her twinkling eyes. "Breakfast is ready," she announced, setting plates of eggs and bacon on the table. "Eat while it is hot." The domesticity of the scene, the four of them gathered around the table like a family, filled Nora with contentment. This was what she had feared lost forever after Thomas's death, the simple joy of belonging somewhere with people who cared for her. After breakfast, Luke reluctantly announced that he needed to ride out to check the herd. "The storm might have scattered them," he explained. "I shouldn't be more than a few hours." "Be careful," Nora said, unable to shake a sudden feeling of unease. Luke kissed her lightly, then more thoroughly when Maria tactfully busied herself at the stove. "Always am," he assured her. "Lock the doors behind me." As Luke rode away, Nora watched from the window, Victoria balanced on her hip. The baby waved her chubby hand as if she understood that Luke was leaving, and Nora felt a tug at her heart at how quickly Victoria had bonded with him. The morning passed quietly as Nora helped Maria with laundry and continued organizing Luke's accounts. By midday, Victoria was down for her nap, and Nora found herself growing increasingly anxious about Luke's prolonged absence. "He is often gone this long," Maria assured her, noticing her frequent glances toward the window. "The cattle sometimes wander far after a storm." But as the afternoon wore on with no sign of Luke, even Maria began to show signs of worry. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Nora made a decision. "I'm going to look for him," she announced, strapping on the revolver Luke had given her. "No, Senora," Maria protested. "It is not safe. What about the Nina? You'll watch her," Nora said, her tone brooking no argument. "If I'm not back by nightfall, take Victoria and go to town for help." Before Maria could object further, the sound of hoofbeats drew them both to the window. Relief flooded Nora as she recognized Luke's chestnut stallion, but the relief turned to ice in her veins when she realized the horse was riderless, its saddle empty and a dark stain that looked horrifyingly like blood smeared across its flank. "Santa Maria," Maria whispered, crossing herself. Nora was already moving, grabbing the shotgun from above the fireplace and checking that it was loaded. "Stay with Victoria," she ordered. "Bar the doors and windows." "You cannot go alone," Maria cried. "I have to," Nora replied, a cold determination settling over her. Something's happened to Luke, and every minute counts. She approached the nervous stallion carefully, murmuring soothing words until she could grab its reins. The blood on its side was definitely fresh, but there was no way to tell if it belonged to Luke or something or someone else. With a silent prayer, Nora mounted the horse, grateful for the riding lessons Luke had begun giving her in recent weeks. "Find Luke," she whispered to the animal, turning it back in the direction from which it had come. "Take me to him." The stallion seemed to understand, setting off at a trot that Nora urged into a gallop once they were clear of the yard. They rode for nearly an hour, following a route that seemed familiar to the horse but took them farther from the ranch than Nora had ever ventured. Just as the sun touched the horizon, they crested a small rise and Nora saw him, Luke, limping painfully across a dry creek bed, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. "Luke," she cried, spurring the horse forward. He looked up at her voice, his face a mask of pain and surprise. "Nora." "What the hell are you doing out here?" She dismounted in a rush, nearly falling in her haste to reach him. "Your horse came back without you. You're hurt." "It's not as bad as it looks," Luke said, though his grimace belied his words. "Blackwood's men ambushed me, shot my horse out from under me." He patted the stallion's neck. "Glad to see you made it home, boy. Can you ride?" Nora asked, noting the makeshift bandage wrapped around Luke's upper arm, already soaked through with blood. "Have to," Luke replied grimly. "They'll be back. I managed to wing one of them before my gun was emptied." With Nora's help, Luke managed to mount, though the effort clearly cost him dearly in pain. She climbed up behind him, taking the reins and wrapping one arm securely around his waist to keep him steady. "Hold on," she murmured against his ear. "Just hold on." They rode back to the ranch as quickly as Luke's condition would allow, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Nora's mind raced with fear and anger, fear for Luke's life, and anger at the men who had hurt him. Maria was waiting anxiously on the porch, Victoria clutched to her chest. Her relief at seeing them was short-lived as she took in Luke's bloodied appearance. "Inside, quickly," she ordered, already turning to prepare her healing supplies. With Nora's support, Luke made it to the kitchen table, where Maria cut away his shirt to reveal an ugly bullet wound in his upper arm. "Clean through," she announced after careful examination. "This will hurt, senor." Luke nodded grimly, his eyes seeking Nora's. "Stay with me." "Always," she promised, taking his good hand in hers. Maria worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Luke hiss through clenched teeth, then stitching it closed with neat, tiny stitches. Throughout the ordeal, Luke never made a sound beyond his labored breathing, but his grip on Nora's hand was tight enough to leave marks. "You are lucky," Maria pronounced when she had finished bandaging the wound. "No bone, no major blood vessels, but you will need rest." "We may not have that luxury," Luke said, his voice strained but steady. "Blackwood's men will be back, and this time they'll come in force. Then we'll be ready for them," Nora said with a conviction that surprised even her. "This is our home, and we'll defend it." Luke looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Nora, I won't risk you and Victoria. It's not your decision alone anymore," she interrupted. "We're in this together now." Their eyes held for a long moment before Luke nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the pain. "Together," he agreed. That night, after Victoria was asleep and Maria had retired to her room, Nora helped Luke to bed, mindful of his injured arm. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. "Stay," he said softly. "Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight." Nora hesitated only briefly before slipping off her shoes and lying down beside him on top of the quilt, still fully dressed. Luke's good arm wrapped around her, pulling her close against his side. "I was afraid I wouldn't see you again," he confessed into the darkness. "When they opened fire, all I could think about was you and Victoria and how I'd failed to protect you." "You haven't failed anyone," Nora said fiercely, propping herself up to look into his face. You've given us a home, Luke, safety, love, and now we're going to fight for it together." In the silver moonlight streaming through the window, Luke's eyes shone with emotion. "I love you, Nora Fletcher. I think I have since the moment I saw you standing there in the dust, holding your baby and refusing to give up." Nora's heart swelled with a joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right and true on her lips. "And when this is over, I want us to be a real family, you, me, and Victoria." Luke's smile was radiant despite his pain. "Nothing would make me happier." They sealed the promise with a tender kiss, both knowing that the coming days would test their newfound happiness to its limits. Dawn arrived with a sense of foreboding that hung over the ranch like a thundercloud. Luke, pale but determined, insisted on getting up despite Nora and Maria's protests. "We need to prepare," he said, wincing as he pulled on a fresh shirt that Maria had modified to accommodate his bandaged arm. Blackwood won't wait long. Together, they formulated a plan. Maria would take Victoria to town, ostensibly to fetch supplies but really to alert the sheriff and get the baby to safety. Luke and Nora would remain at the ranch, fortifying it as best they could against the expected attack. "Are you sure about this?" Luke asked Nora one last time as they watched Maria ride away in the wagon, Victoria securely bundled beside her. "You could go with them." "My place is here," Nora said firmly, checking the revolver at her waist. "Besides, I'm a better shot than Maria." Luke's chuckle turned into a grimace as the movement jarred his injured arm. "That you are." They spent the morning boarding up windows, moving furniture to create barricades, and positioning weapons at strategic points throughout the house. By midday, they were as prepared as they could be and settled in to wait. The attack came just before dusk, when the setting sun would be in the defenders' eyes if they looked westward. 7 riders approached from that direction, led by the blond man Nora recognized as Wade Keller. Blackwood shouted from just beyond rifle range. "We're here for what's ours." Luke, positioned at an upstairs window with a rifle, called back, "Nothing here belongs to you, Blackwood. This land should have been mine." Blackwood's voice carried clearly across the yard. "My father had the claim first before yours cheated him out of it." "That's a lie and you know it." Luke's voice remained steady, but Nora could see the tension in his jaw. "My father paid fair and square for this land. The courts settled it 20 years ago." Blackwood's response was to raise his arm and bring it down in a sharp gesture. His men immediately spread out, taking cover behind rocks, trees, and the outbuildings. "Get ready," Luke murmured to Nora, who stood at another window with the shotgun. "They'll try to rush us from different directions. Aim for the chest, not the head-bigger target." The first shot came from behind the barn, shattering a downstairs window that they had not had time to board up. Glass exploded inward, and the battle began in earnest. For what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the air was filled with the thunder of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Nora fired the shotgun twice, driving back a man who had attempted to reach the porch. Luke's rifle cracked methodically, each shot precisely placed. "I'm down to my last few rounds," Luke called from his position. "How are you holding up?" "3 shells left," Nora replied, her ears ringing from the constant noise. "Luke, I think they're pulling back." Indeed, Blackwood's men had retreated to more distant cover, their fire becoming more sporadic. Hope flickered in Nora's chest. Perhaps they had decided the price was too high. That hope died as she saw Blackwood himself emerge from behind a boulder, a burning torch in his hand. "He's going to try to burn us out," Luke said grimly, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the east drew everyone's attention. A group of riders appeared, led by a man wearing a silver star on his vest, the sheriff, with Maria and at least 10 townsmen behind him. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff bellowed. "This ends now." Blackwood hesitated, clearly calculating his odds against the new arrivals. With a curse, he flung the torch away and raised his hands, his men reluctantly following suit. The next hour passed in a blur as the sheriff and his posse rounded up Blackwood and his men. Luke's wound was rebandaged by the town doctor who had accompanied the sheriff, and statements were taken from both Luke and Nora about the ambush and subsequent attack. Blackwoods wanted in 2 territories. The sheriff informed them as his deputies led the prisoners away. Murder, rustling, extortion, you 2 are lucky to be alive. Luck had nothing to do with it, Luke said, his good arm around Nora's shoulders. We had something worth fighting for. Marrier returned with Victoria just before sunset, the baby fussing after the excitement of the day. As Nora took her daughter into her arms, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. They had survived, they were safe, they were together. That night, after the last of the townspeople had departed with promises to return the next day to help with repairs, Luke, Nora, Maria, and Victoria gathered around the kitchen table for a simple meal. Despite his injury and the day's violence, Luke seemed more at peace than Nora had ever seen him. "I've been thinking," he said as Maria cleared the dishes, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Nora asked, Victoria dozing against her shoulder. "I mean us," Luke replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You, me, Victoria, I meant what I said last night, Nora. I want us to be a family, a real one." With Maria beaming in the background, Luke awkwardly lowered himself to one knee beside Nora's chair, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "Nora Fletcher, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you and Victoria for all my days, to protect you with my life, and to never let you walk alone again." Tears of joy blurred Nora's vision as she gazed down at this man who had rescued her in more ways than he knew. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Luke Keller, I will marry you." Their kiss was interrupted by Victoria, who chose that moment to wake and pat Luke's cheek with her tiny hand, as if giving her own blessing to the union. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in town. Luke, his arm still in a sling but healing well, stood tall and proud at the altar as Nora walked toward him in a simple blue dress that Maria had worked day and night to finish. Victoria, dressed in a miniature version of her mother's gown, was carried by Maria, who wept openly throughout the ceremony. "I take thee, Nora, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Luke's voice rang clear and true in the small church. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Nora repeated the vows, her voice trembled with emotion but never faltered. As they exchanged rings, Luke had ridden all the way to Santa Fe to find a matching set. She felt Thomas's presence one last time, a gentle benediction and farewell. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Luke's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Luke Keller, Victoria reached for Luke from Maria's arms. "Pa," she said clearly, her first word. The joy on Luke's face as he took his new daughter into his arms was a sight Nora knew she would treasure forever. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your papa now." The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding gradually as they acquired neighboring land including, ironically, Blackwood's property, which was sold at auction after his conviction. They weathered droughts, harsh winters, and the occasional dispute with passing trail hands or neighboring ranchers. But through it all, their love remained steadfast, growing deeper with each passing day. Victoria thrived, a spirited girl with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's kind heart. 2 years after their wedding, she was joined by a brother, Lucas Thomas Keller, born during a spring thunderstorm that Luke insisted was just the angels celebrating. On the 5th anniversary of the day Luke had found Nora walking barefoot with Victoria in her arms, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with the new puppy Luke had brought home the week before. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Nora asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. "If you hadn't found me that day," Luke's arms tightened around her. "I try not to," he admitted, "the thought of you and Victoria out there alone. It still keeps me up at night sometimes." Nora turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the lines that time and sun had etched around his eyes. "I believe we were meant to find each other," she said softly. "That somehow, no matter what paths we took, we would have ended up here together." Luke smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I think you're right," he said, lowering his head to kiss her. "Some things are just meant to be." As the sun set over the Double K Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Luke and Nora Keller held each other close, surrounded by the family and the life they had built together, all because a cowboy had once said to a barefoot woman with a baby in her arms, "Come on up behind me." In the years that followed, their story became something of a legend in the territory. People spoke of the fierce love between the rancher and the widow, of how they had faced down danger together and built a life filled with joy and purpose. Their children grew strong and true, carrying forward the legacy of courage and compassion that their parents had established. By the turn of the century, the Double K was one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory, known for its fair dealings and the kindness of its owners. Luke and Nora, their hair now streaked with silver but their love undimmed by time, watched with pride as Victoria married the son of a neighboring rancher, bringing the two properties together in a union that strengthened both families. Young Lucas, following in his father's footsteps, took on increasing responsibility for the ranch operations, introducing modern methods while respecting the traditions that had made the Double K successful. Two more children had joined the family over the years: Emma Maria, named for Luke's mother and their dear friend, and James Thomas, who bore the names of both grandfathers he had never known. On warm summer evenings, Luke and Nora could often be found on the porch swing he had built for her 40th birthday, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sun set over the land they loved. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of their hopes for their children and grandchildren. Sometimes they reminisced about the past, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared. But mostly, they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence that comes from a lifetime of understanding and acceptance. "You know," Luke said one such evening, his voice softened by age but still carrying the strength that had first drawn Nora to him, "not a day goes by that I don't thank God for guiding me to you that day." Nora smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And not a day goes by that I don't thank him for giving me the courage to accept your help. We've had a good life, haven't we?" Luke's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of decades together. "The best," Nora agreed, her heart full as she gazed out at the ranch that had become her haven, at the family that had blossomed from what had once seemed like the end of all her hopes. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." As twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared in the vast New Mexico sky, Luke Keller held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on a dusty trail to a lifetime of love and partnership, their story had unfolded in ways neither could have anticipated, but both would forever cherish. And though the Wild West would eventually give way to a new era of automobiles and telephones, of statehood and progress, the legend of the barefoot woman with a baby in her arms and the cowboy who offered her a place behind him would live on, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love.